I stood up and started pacing around the kitchen. $120 million was an impossible amount to imagine, but living locked up for a year investigating a possible death, that sounded like a horror movie. And if I can't discover anything, in that case, you receive $25,000 and the rest goes to charity. $25,000 was still more money than I'd ever had in my life, but after knowing about $120 million, and if I refuse everything now, then you receive nothing and sign a confidentiality agreement about everything we discussed today. It was a perfect trap. Accepting was risky. Refusing was foolish. I looked around my tiny apartment, the bills piled on the table, the ceiling leak I didn't have money to fix, the empty refrigerator. $120 million could change not only my life, but the lives of every person I helped. Hospitals, daycare centers, libraries. When do I need to decide? Now. And he placed the pen in front of me. I should have asked why Edward Beaumont chose me, should have demanded to know how he knew me, should have been suspicious of all of it. But poverty does strange things to our judgment. I signed the papers. 2 weeks later, I was in the back seat of a black Mercedes being driven to what I thought would be my new life. I didn't know I was being driven to a gilded prison, a prison where someone was waiting to kill me. The Beaumont estate was larger than I expected, larger and more haunted. 3 stories of gray stone rose against the cloudy sky like something out of a Gothic movie. Dozens of windows reflected the faint late afternoon light, looking like empty eyes watching me from the walls. The driver, who hadn't said a word during the entire 2-hour drive, left my only suitcase at the entrance and departed without ceremony. I stood there, alone, looking at this construction that would be my home for the next 12 months. Not completely alone, as I discovered. The front door opened before I even touched the doorbell. Miss Anderson, I presume? The woman who greeted me was about 60 years old, gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and blue eyes that seemed to analyze me as if I were an interesting insect. I'm Margaret Albright, the house governess. Dr. Thorne informed me of your arrival. There was something about the way she said arrival that made me feel like an intruder, not an heir. My name is Emily Anderson, and I need to tell you a story that nearly cost me my life. A story about $120 million that became my death sentence. Before I begin, I need you to understand something. When someone shows up at your door offering you a fortune you never asked for, there's always a price. And that price is almost always higher than you can pay. I should have known that the moment I saw the man in the gray suit standing at my door that Tuesday in March. I should have closed the door in his face and continued my simple life as a librarian, but I didn't. And that was almost my downfall. It was an ordinary morning when everything changed. I was organizing returned books at the city library when my cell phone rang. Unknown number. I don't usually answer unknown numbers, but something made me accept the call. Miss Emily Anderson? The voice was formal, polite. My name is Dr. Robert Thorne. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter. Could I visit you today? My first reaction was distrust. Lawyers don't seek out librarians for no reason. But he insisted it was about an inheritance, and curiosity got the better of me. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my cramped kitchen, looking at the most elegant man who had ever stepped foot in my apartment. Dr. Thorne looked like he'd stepped out of an expensive movie with his impeccable suit and genuine leather briefcase. Miss Anderson, he began, removing documents from his briefcase. I regret to inform you that Mr. Edward Beaumont passed away 3 weeks ago. I frowned. I'm sorry, but I don't know any Beaumont. He smiled. It was a strange smile, as if he knew something I didn't. But he knew you. Very well, in fact. My stomach contracted. There was something about the way he said that. Dr. Thorne slid a document across the table. I read the first lines and felt the world spin. I leave my entire fortune, estimated at $120 million, to my only known heir, Emily Anderson. $120 million. I reread the line 3 times. The numbers didn't change. Is this some kind of scam? I asked, pushing the document back. I can assure you it's completely legitimate. However, as is common with estates of this magnitude, there are certain conditions. Of course there were conditions. There are always conditions when something seems too good to be true. What kind of conditions? You must live on Mr. Beaumont's property for exactly 1 year. During this period, you cannot leave the property, receive visitors, or maintain regular contact with the outside world. I blanked. That's strange. And there's one more thing. He leaned forward. You must discover the true cause of Mr. Beaumont's death. True cause? Didn't he die of natural causes? The death certificate says myocardial infarction, but Mr. Beaumont made it clear in his will that he didn't trust that diagnosis. My heart started beating faster. Are you insinuating he was murdered? He's saying he believed that, and now it's up to you to prove whether he was right or not. I stood up and started pacing around the kitchen. $120 million was an impossible amount to imagine. But living locked up for a year, investigating a possible death, that sounded like a horror movie. And if I can't discover anything, in that case, you receive $25,000 and the rest goes to charity. $25,000 was still more money than I'd ever had in my life, but after knowing about $120 million, and if I refuse everything now, then you receive nothing and sign a confidentiality agreement about everything we discussed today. It was a perfect trap. Accepting was risky. Refusing was foolish. I looked around my tiny apartment, the bills piled on the table, the ceiling leak I didn't have money to fix, the empty refrigerator. $120 million could change not only my life, but the lives of every person I helped. Hospitals, daycare centers, libraries. When do I need to decide? Now. And he placed a pen in front of me. I should have asked why Edward Beaumont chose me, should have demanded to know how he knew me, should have been suspicious of all of it. But poverty does strange things to our judgment. I signed the papers. 2 weeks later, I was in the back seat of a black Mercedes being driven to what I thought would be my new life. I didn't know I was being driven to a gilded prison, a prison where someone was waiting to kill me. The Beaumont estate was larger than I expected, larger and more haunted. 3 stories of gray stone rose against the cloudy sky like something out of a Gothic movie. Dozens of windows reflected the faint late afternoon light, looking like empty eyes watching me from the walls. The driver, who hadn't said a word during the entire 2-hour drive, left my only suitcase at the entrance and departed without ceremony. I stood there, alone, looking at this construction that would be my home for the next 12 months. Not completely alone, as I discovered. The front door opened before I even touched the doorbell. Miss Anderson, I presume? The woman who greeted me was about 60 years old, gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and blue eyes that seemed to analyze me as if I were an interesting insect. I'm Margaret Albright, the house governess. Dr. Thorne informed me of your arrival. There was something about the way she said arrival that made me feel like an intruder, not an heir. While unpacking my few clothes, I found something strange in the antique dresser drawer, a yellowed card, handwritten in black ink. Don't trust anyone. E.B. Edward Beaumont had left a message for me, but why? And why did I feel like someone was watching me through the window curtains? That night, during a silent dinner served in a dining room that could accommodate 20 people, Margaret watched me eat every bite. "Are you enjoying the food?" "It's delicious," I lied. Actually, there was a strange taste to the food, metallic, as if something had been added. "Good." She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. That night, lying in the gigantic bed, I heard footsteps on the floor above. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped exactly over my room. When I asked about them the next day, Margaret just smiled. "The third floor is closed for renovations, dear. Must be some animal in the attic." Animals don't wear shoes. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't an heir. I was a prisoner. The next morning, Dr. Thorne returned to clarify some details of the will. Seated in the living room with Margaret serving coffee in porcelain cups that looked like family heirlooms, he opened a different briefcase from the one he'd brought to my apartment. "Miss Anderson, I need to be more specific about your obligations here." Obligations? Not rights. Obligations. Mr. Beaumont left very clear instructions. You have 365 days to discover who killed him and how. Killed? My voice came out higher than I'd like. I thought he died of natural causes. Dr. Thorne exchanged a glance with Margaret. Quick, but I saw it. The official death certificate says myocardial infarction, but Edward knew the truth. He slid a sheet across the table. I read with growing horror. If I failed to discover the truth in 1 year, all the fortune would be donated to charity. I would receive only $25,000. And if I want to quit now? Quitting results in nothing, $0. And you sign a permanent confidentiality agreement about everything related to the Beaumont family. It was a perfect trap. There are some restrictions during your stay. No cell phone, no free internet, only supervised access once a week. No visitors, no outings, except medical emergencies. And Miss Albright will be your companion throughout the entire process. Another glance between them. Something was definitely happening that I wasn't seeing. And if I discover who killed Edward, then you become one of the richest women in the country. I signed the documents with a trembling hand. When Dr. Thorne left, Margaret approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Beaumont family, dear. I hope you survive the experience." Survive? Why did she use that specific word? The first week at the mansion was like living in a haunted museum. I explored room after room, trying to understand who Edward Beaumont had been. The library had 3,000 books. The music room, a grand piano covered by a layer of dust. The main office was locked. Margaret said the key had been lost. Lost, of course. But it was the small details that started to bother me. Noises at night, which Margaret explained as the house settling. Doors I was sure I'd left open but found closed the next morning. And the footsteps. Every night at exactly midnight, I heard footsteps on the 3rd floor. Slow, deliberate, stopping directly over my room. When I questioned Margaret again, she maintained her story about renovations and animals in the attic. But I knew animals don't wear leather shoes. On the 5th night, during a storm that made the windows tremble, I decided to investigate on my own. The staircase to the 3rd floor creaked with each step. My heart beat so loud I was sure whoever was up there could hear it. At the top, I found a long corridor with doors on both sides, all locked except one at the end. I pushed the door slowly. It was a small room, but clearly inhabited, an unmade bed, a half-full glass of water on the nightstand, last week's newspapers piled on a chair. Someone was living on the third floor, someone Margaret didn't want me to know existed. I opened the desk drawer looking for clues about who it might be. What I found made my blood run cold. Photographs, dozens of them, all of me, arriving at the mansion, in the garden, reading in the library, one even of me sleeping in my room, all taken in the last few days, all with a red X marked in the upper right corner. I picked up one of the photos with trembling hands. It was of me in the dining room the night before, chewing that food with a strange taste. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. I grabbed a photo and stuffed it in my pocket and ran to the door, but it was too late. You shouldn't be here. In the doorway stood a man I had never seen before, tall, thin, with dark eyes that seemed to know me very well. Margaret won't like this at all. I ran past him and descended the stairs 2 at a time, my heart racing. I locked my bedroom door and leaned against it, trying to control my breathing. Who was that man? Why was he photographing me? And why did all the photos have that red X? 3 gentle knocks on the door. Emily, dear, is everything okay? I heard noises at night. I didn't answer. For the first time since being at the mansion, I felt true fear. I wasn't there to inherit a fortune. I was there as prey, and the predator had just revealed himself. Margaret acted as if nothing had happened the next morning. She served breakfast with her usual cold smile, but I noticed she was watching me more intensely, as if cataloging each of my reactions. Did you sleep well, dear? Sometimes this old house makes strange noises at night. I decided to play her game. Perfectly well. Just a few nightmares. She smiled, but her eyes remained icy. That's too bad. Perhaps I can ask Dr. Thorne for some sleeping pills. Sleeping pills? To make me more vulnerable? No, thank you. I prefer to deal with them naturally. After breakfast, Margaret left to go shopping in town. For the first time in a week, I was completely alone in the mansion. It was the chance I'd been waiting for. I went straight to the library looking for any information about Edward Beaumont. Most of the books seemed decorative, never read, but in the back, between dusty volumes of philosophy, I found something interesting, a biography of Napoleon that seemed to have been handled recently. When I opened it, I discovered it was completely hollow inside. In place of the pages, someone had carved a compartment that fit perfectly a brown leather diary. My hands trembled when I opened the first page. Personal Diary of Edward Beaumont. The first entries were banal. Business meetings, comments about the weather, observations about Margaret's food. But as the dates advanced, the tone changed drastically. March 15th. Margaret is acting strangely. Yesterday, I caught her rummaging through my office when she thought I was asleep. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was cleaning, but there was nothing clean about her hands. April 3rd. I'm sure someone was in my office. Important documents were moved. Nothing was taken, but someone was looking for something specific. April 18th. I'm not imagining things. There's something wrong with my food. I feel weak and nauseous after every meal. Margaret always insists I finish everything on my plate. My stomach contracted. The metallic taste in my food. May 2nd. I hired a private detective to investigate Margaret. The results are disturbing. She worked for 3 wealthy families before mine. All had sudden and convenient deaths. All left Margaret well-positioned financially. I kept reading, each word confirming my worst fears. May 10th. There's a man on the 3rd floor. Margaret said he's a maintenance worker. But maintenance for what? And why does he wear leather shoes for renovations? I hear him walking over my room every night. May 16th. I changed my will today. If anything happens to me, she will come. The only person who can discover the truth and whom Margaret doesn't expect. My last hope. She? Edward was referring to me. May 28th. The poison is working. I can feel my body failing, but I left clues in my mother's music box, hidden in the secret room behind the library fireplace. If something happens to me, I hope she's smarter than I was. The last entry was 3 days before his death. May 21st. They know I know. Margaret brought a special cup of tea today, said it would help me sleep better. I'm not going to drink it. If you're reading this, it's because I couldn't stop them. The truth is in the music box. The truth about who I really am and about who she really is. I closed the diary with trembling hands. Edward Beaumont didn't die of natural causes. He was murdered, slowly, methodically, by Margaret and her accomplice from the 3rd floor. And now I was in the same house, eating her food, being watched by the same man. But why did Edward choose me? How did he know me? And what was in that music box that was so important? I looked around the library, searching for the fireplace, and there it was, on the other side of the room. It was time to discover the truth, even if it killed me. The library fireplace looked ordinary at first glance, gray marble with elaborate decorations flanked by 2 antique leather armchairs, but Edward had mentioned a secret room behind the fireplace. I ran my hands over the marble structure, looking for some kind of hidden mechanism. Nothing. I pushed several decorative stones. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange in one of the side ornaments. A marble rose that seemed slightly misaligned from the others. I pressed it hard. A soft click echoed through the library, and a section of the wall next to the fireplace moved inward, revealing a narrow passage. My heart raced. Edward wasn't delirious. There really was a secret room. The passage was cramped and dark. I used my cell phone flashlight, which Margaret had allowed me to keep only for emergencies, to light the way. On the other side, I found a small, windowless room with an antique desk and some dusty shelves. And in the center of the table, exactly as Edward had described, was a small carved wooden music box. My hand trembled when I opened it. The melody that played was sad and haunting, but more important than the music was what was inside. A secret compartment in the bottom of the box. It contained a flash drive and an old photograph. The photograph left me breathless. It was of a young woman holding 2 babies, twins, a boy and a girl, identical in every aspect except gender. On the back, a handwritten note, Edward and Emily, my angels, born August 15th, 1995. May God always protect them. August 15th, 1995, my birth date. I looked at the photo again, studying the woman's face. There was something familiar about her, something that made me feel a pang of recognition. And then I understood. The woman in the photo had my face. Older, more tired, but definitely my face. Edward Beaumont wasn't a distant relative. He was my twin brother. I connected the flash drive to the old laptop that was on the desk, hoping it still worked. It did. What I saw on the screen changed everything. Videos of Edward recorded in the last weeks of his life, explaining the whole truth. If you're seeing this, Emily, then you managed to find it. Our mother was Helena Beaumont. She had us when she was only 16. Our father was a powerful and married man who abandoned her when he discovered the pregnancy. I paused the video, trying to process. Mom died in childbirth. I was raised here at the mansion by our paternal grandfather. You were taken by an adoptive family. I spent my entire life looking for you. But it wasn't me who found you first. It was him. Marcus. Marcus? Who was Marcus? Marcus Beaumont, our half-brother. He killed our father years ago to inherit everything, but discovered the will included you and me as heirs, so he found me first. The video showed Edward, visibly ill, speaking urgently. Marcus has been poisoning me slowly for months. Margaret works for him. Their plan was to kill me, then bring you here with the promise of inheritance. And then, eliminate you too. 2 convenient accidents, and Marcus inherits everything. My breathing became irregular. But I changed the will. If anything happens to me, you inherit everything. Marcus only gets something if he can prove you're mentally unstable or if you die in an accident. I stopped the video, my mind racing. Edward brought me here not as a victim, but as revenge. He knew Marcus would try to kill me, but he also knew I was smart enough to discover the truth. The only problem was that Marcus and Margaret didn't know I had already discovered everything, and they were planning to kill me tonight. I could taste the metallic taste in the food, the sleeping pills Margaret had offered, the photos with red X's. But now I had an advantage. They didn't know that I knew everything. It was time to turn the tables. I returned to my room with the flash drive hidden in my bra and the photo in my pants pocket. Margaret had returned from her shopping and was preparing dinner. The aroma rose up the stairs, but now I knew exactly what that metallic smell meant. Poison. I sat on the bed and formulated a plan. If Marcus and Margaret wanted to kill me, they'd expect me to be unconscious or weakened. They'd probably use something in dinner to make me vulnerable. But what if I turned the situation around? At 7 o'clock sharp, I went down to dinner as I always did. Margaret greeted me with her fake smile. "Good evening, dear. I prepared your favorite dish." She placed in front of me a plate of salmon with sauce that smelled delicious, but had that characteristic oily sheen that I now knew meant danger. "Thank you, Margaret. But before I eat, I need to tell you something interesting I discovered today." She stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "What was that, dear?" "I found the secret room behind the library fireplace." The fork fell from Margaret's hand, hitting the plate with a metallic sound. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." I took the photo from my pocket and placed it on the table. "Did you know Edward was my twin brother?" Margaret's face went pale. "You're delirious, child. I also found the videos Edward recorded before he died. Very enlightening, especially the part about Marcus." At that moment, heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Marcus entered the dining room, no longer hiding. "Well, well, it seems our heiress is smarter than we thought." "You're my half-brother," I said, voice firm. "Technically, yes, though I prefer to think of you and Edward as problems that needed to be solved." "You were the one who killed our father too, weren't you?" Marcus smiled. It was a terrible smile. "Dad was getting old and sentimental. He started talking about finding you and Edward, about dividing the inheritance more fairly. I couldn't allow that." Margaret rose from her chair, revealing a kitchen knife she'd been hiding in her lap. "Enough talking. Let's finish this." "Not so fast." I took the flash drive from my bra. This flash drive contains not only Edward's videos, but also files he copied from our father's computer. Documents proving Marcus murdered him, too. "You're lying." Of course there were no documents besides the videos, but they didn't know that. And you know what's most interesting? Edward programmed this flash drive to be automatically sent to the police and several journalists if he didn't enter a specific code every 48 hours, since he died 3 weeks ago. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Want to risk it?" The police should have received everything days ago. The only reason they haven't come here yet is because Edward asked them to wait until I had a chance to safely leave the mansion. It was another lie, but a convincing one. Marcus looked at Margaret, then at me. "Even if that's true, it doesn't matter. You're going to have an accident before you can talk to anyone, and accidents don't leave witnesses." He signaled to Margaret, who started approaching with the knife. "There's just one problem with your plan," I said, standing slowly from my chair, "which is, Dr. Thorne doesn't work for you." The confusion on their faces was evident. Edward hired the real Dr. Thorne months ago. The man you think is Thorne is actually a private detective, and he's recording everything. I pointed to the chandelier above the table. Smile for the camera. Marcus and Margaret looked up instinctively. That's when I ran. I passed Margaret, dodged Marcus, and ran toward the front door, but Marcus was faster than I expected. He caught me in the hall, knocking me to the marble floor. "Enough games," he shouted, holding my wrists. Margaret appeared with the knife, panting. "Let's end this once and for all." But at that moment, the front door burst open with a crash. "Police! Nobody move!" 3 police officers entered, guns drawn. The man I knew as Dr. Thorne entered behind the officers, but now showed a detective badge. "Detective Mendez, State Police. Marcus Beaumont, you're under arrest for the murders of Edward and Robert Beaumont." "How?" Marcus stammered. "Edward Beaumont hired me months ago. He suspected you were poisoning him. We installed cameras and microphones throughout the mansion, and we have everything recorded." Margaret tried to flee, but one of the officers intercepted her. "Margaret Albright, you're also under arrest as an accomplice." As they were handcuffed, the detective approached me. "Are you okay, Emily?" I was trembling, but alive. How did Edward know all this would happen? He didn't know exactly, but he knew Marcus well enough to know he'd try something. The will was an elaborate trap. If Marcus tried to kill you, he'd be caught red-handed. If he didn't try, you'd inherit everything anyway. And if I hadn't discovered the truth, there was no need. We had enough evidence to arrest them since the first week. But Edward wanted you to know the truth about your family, about who you really are. You're not just Emily Anderson, the librarian. You're Emily Beaumont, heiress to an empire, sister of someone who loved you even without ever meeting you. Use our fortune to do good in the world. It's what our parents would have wanted. I cried reading those words. Edward had spent his entire life looking for me, and when he finally found me, he was already dying. But even so, he found a way to protect me and give me a family I never knew I had. 1 year later, the Beaumont estate had transformed into something completely different. I turned it into the Edward and Emily Beaumont Foundation, an organization that helps orphaned children and adoptive families. We built an immense library where anyone in town can read for free. I renovated the mansion to house 20 children at a time, all waiting for adoption or going through difficult processes. I found the family that adopted me as a baby. My adoptive mother, Mrs. Rose, had died years ago, but she had left me letters explaining how she received me. She knew I had a brother, but never managed to tell me because she died when I was very young. Detective Mendez became a close friend. He helped me understand all the legal documents and completely unraveled the Beaumont family's past. I discovered my father had been Robert Beaumont, an agribusiness magnate. He really had abandoned my mother when he discovered she was pregnant with twins, but had regretted it in the last years of his life. That's when he started looking for Edward and me, that Marcus decided to kill him. The fortune I inherited is larger than I ever imagined using alone. It really is $120 million. But now it has a purpose. Each child I help, each family that receives assistance, each student who gets a scholarship, all are a tribute to the brother I never met, but who loved me enough to sacrifice his own life to protect me. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the library I built in Edward's memory, I feel as if he's there with me, as if he's proud of what we've done with our inheritance. The mansion no longer haunts. It pulses with life, with children's laughter, with hope. Edward wanted me to discover who I really was, and I did. I'm not just a poor librarian who got lucky. I'm Emily Beaumont, sister, daughter, survivor, and guardian of a legacy that goes far beyond money. Sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones that come in wills. They're the ones that come from love, even if that love must cross through death to reach us. Edward taught me that, and now I teach it to the world. This is my story. The story of how a simple librarian transformed into the most dangerous adventure of my life, of how I discovered that sometimes winning life's lottery can cost you everything you have, but also the story of how a brother's love can transcend any obstacle, even death. If you ever receive an unexpected inheritance, remember my story. Ask yourself, why me? Why now? And most importantly, who really benefits from this? Because sometimes the greatest fortune in the world isn't worth it if the price is your life. But other times, like in my case, it's worth fighting for, especially when you're not fighting alone, especially when you have a guardian angel you never met, but who loved you anyway. My name is Emily Beaumont, and this was the story of how I inherited much more than money. I inherited a family, a mission, and a second chance to live.